On a frozen road in Montana, a mother German shepherd ran from a white ambulance with a newborn puppy held gently in her mouth. Retired Navy SEAL Nolan Pierce thought he was only stopping a frightened dog from disappearing into the snow. But the mother dog was not afraid of people. She was afraid of going back. Around her neck hung a torn sanctuary tag, stamped with a number someone had tried to scratch away. Before sunrise, that mother dog would lead Nolan behind the walls of the shelter the whole town trusted most. If what this mother dog does next touches your heart, don't leave just yet. Tell us where you're watching from tonight. Snow had a way of making Montana look forgiven. By late afternoon, the road outside Merrow Creek had turned white from shoulder to shoulder, its tire tracks softening under a steady fall of powder. The pine trees stood on both sides like dark witnesses, their branches bent beneath the weight of winter. Beyond them, the land dropped into quiet fields, frozen creek beds, and lonely cabins scattered so far apart that a man could disappear there without anyone calling it strange. Nolan Pierce preferred it that way. At 55, Nolan was still built like a man who had once carried heavy things through impossible places. He stood 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with a body kept firm by discipline rather than vanity. He was not bulky, not showy, but solid in the way of men who still woke before dawn and treated exercise like brushing their teeth. His face was clean-shaven, sharply cut, with a strong jaw, straight nose, and the kind of masculine American handsomeness that age had not softened so much as carved deeper. His dark hair, trimmed in a neat undercut, had gone silver at the temples. His eyes were the part people remembered, deep, quiet, and sad, as if they had learned long ago not to ask the world for gentleness. He wore his usual long-sleeved green camouflage set, fitted cleanly to his frame, the sleeves buttoned, the collar straight, the pants tucked into dark winter boots. Even alone, even on a back road with no one watching, Nolan looked as if he had never fully left the service. Some men returned from war and dressed loudly to prove they were civilians again. Nolan kept everything ordered because order was the only thing that had not betrayed him. On the passenger seat beside him sat a 20-pound bag of dog food. He had bought it from Gable's Feed and Supply 30 minutes earlier without thinking. Chicken and rice formula. Same brand Bishop used to like. Same size bag. Same foolish habit. Bishop had been gone almost 2 years. Nolan did not call that grief. Grief sounded too warm, too human, too close to something a person might admit over coffee with a friend. Nolan called it routine. Routine was safer. Routine did not ask why a man with no dog still kept a folded wool blanket behind the seat of his pickup, or why the old leather collar still hung from a hook beside the cabin door. The truck heater hummed. The windshield wipers dragged snow to the edges of the glass. Nolan drove one-handed, his other hand resting near the gear shift, posture straight, eyes moving out of habit. Ditch line, tree break, mirror, road crown, fence gap. He had been home for years, but his body still scanned the world as if danger preferred quiet places. He was less than 3 miles from the turnoff to his cabin when he saw the white vehicle. It sat crooked on the right shoulder, half in the lane, half on the frozen gravel. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the snowfall. At first, Nolan thought it was a county maintenance van. Then his headlights caught the pale blue lettering on the side. Silver Paw Sanctuary. The logo showed a silver paw print tucked inside a blue circle, gentle and clean, the kind of emblem printed on charity flyers, donation jars, Christmas calendars, and church bulletin boards. Everyone in Merrow Creek knew Silver Paw. People spoke of it with soft voices. The last home for old dogs. The safe place for sick dogs. The sanctuary that never gave up on the animals nobody else wanted. Nolan had donated twice. Once after Bishop died. Once because June Keller, an older volunteer from town, had looked at him with kind eyes and said, "It helps the ones who have nowhere else." He slowed. The rear door of the white veterinary ambulance was open. Not wide, just enough to suggest haste. Then Nolan saw the red line. It was thin, almost hidden beneath falling snow, drawn from the open door down to the shoulder and toward the trees. Not a pool, not a scene, just a narrow streak like a red thread someone had pulled across winter and forgotten to gather back. Nolan's hand tightened on the wheel. A sound snapped from the timberline. Branches cracked. Something dark burst out of the pines. A German shepherd. She came low and fast, her paws slipping on the crusted snow, her body trembling with exhaustion, but still moving with purpose. She was a mother. That was the first thing Nolan knew. Not because of her shape alone, though her belly showed the signs clearly, but because of the way she carried the tiny bundle in her mouth. A newborn puppy. The pup hung carefully from the scruff, limp but alive, its small body dark and wet against the mother's black and gold muzzle. The shepherd herself was yellow and black, the classic working dog colors, but winter had dulled her coat. Snow clung to her chest and belly. Mud darkened the fur around her legs. She was too thin, ribs faint under the heavy coat, yet there was nothing weak in her eyes. They were amber, sharp, terrified, remembering. Behind her, two figures in white coats pushed through the trees. The first was a young male attendant, narrow-shouldered, red-faced from the cold, fear making him clumsy. The second moved with far more control, Dr. Mara Voss. Nolan recognized her from town fundraisers and newspaper photographs. Mara was around 50, trim and composed, with ash-blonde hair pulled back neatly at the nape of her neck. Her face was intelligent and angular, attractive in a severe way, with pale skin reddened at the cheeks by the cold. Her white medical coat was thick and spotless except for snow along the hem, and the silver paw logo sat over her left breast like a badge of mercy. Everything about her seemed measured. Her steps, her voice, the way she raised one gloved hand as if calming an audience. But her eyes were cold.
"Don't touch her," Mara shouted. "She's unstable." The shepherd heard her voice and stumbled, not because she was turning back, because fear went through her body so hard it almost took her legs. Nolan stopped the truck at an angle across the lane, blocking part of the road. He stepped out into the storm. The cold hit his face. Snow gathered on his shoulders and the sleeves of his green camouflage shirt. He did not slam the door. He did not rush. Every movement slowed by instinct and care. The shepherd turned toward him. For one suspended second, the whole road seemed to hold its breath. She could have run into the trees. She could have bared her teeth. She could have vanished under the falling snow and left everyone chasing paw prints in the dark. Instead, she came toward Nolan. 3 steps. 4. Then she lowered her head and placed the newborn puppy in the snow directly in front of his boots. Nolan felt something inside him move, old and painful. The dog did not look like an animal surrendering. She looked like a mother handing over the only thing she could not afford to lose. "Easy," Nolan said quietly. His voice surprised him. It came out softer than he had used with any living thing in months. The shepherd stood over the puppy, shaking, her body angled between Nolan and the white ambulance. She did not growl at him. She did not snap. Her ears flattened only when Mara stepped closer. "That dog belongs to Silver Paw," Mara said, breath smoking in the air. "Her name is Sable. She delivered prematurely in our medical wing and bolted during treatment. She is in a dangerous postpartum state. Step away from the puppy." Nolan did not look away from the dog. Sable. The name fit her coat, the black saddle over yellow gold fur, the dark mask around her muzzle, the beautiful ruined dignity of her. She was not old, maybe 4 or 5, but she carried the exhaustion of a creature who had been asked to survive more than one life. The puppy made a sound so small Nolan barely heard it. Sable's head snapped down. Her tongue touched the pup once, quick and desperate. The male attendant took a step forward with a capture lead. Sable saw the loop of rope and changed. Her lips lifted, not at Nolan, at the white coat, at the logo, at the tool in the man's hand. Her body dropped low, trembling not with aggression, but with memory. Nolan saw it then. She was not afraid of people. She was afraid of them. Mara's voice sharpened.
"Mr. Pierce, I know who you are. You're not helping her by interfering." That should have stopped him. Instead, hearing his name from her mouth made the road feel colder. Nolan crouched slowly, turning his body slightly sideways so he did not face Sable head-on. He kept his hand low, palm open, fingers relaxed. The old training returned without ceremony. Never tower over fear. Never grab what is already cornered. Never mistake panic for violence. Sable stared at him. Then she leaned forward. Her nose touched his glove. She sniffed once, then again. Maybe she smelled the dog food in the truck. Maybe the old wool blanket behind his seat still carried Bishop's fading scent. Maybe she recognized something no human could measure. A man who had lived beside a dog and still carried the shape of that loyalty. Nolan whispered, "Easy, girl, I hear you." Sable's eyes changed. Not trust, not yet, but something inside her stopped bracing for a blow. Behind him, Mara said, "She needs medication. That puppy needs neonatal support. If you take them from us, you may kill them with good intentions." The words landed hard because they were possible. That was the cruel thing about professional lies. They often borrowed the shape of truth. Nolan looked at the puppy. It was impossibly small, black along the back, pale gold under the chin, eyes sealed shut, body trembling against the snow. It needed warmth. It needed milk. It needed someone who knew what they were doing. He also looked at Sable. She had not moved away from his hand, but every time Mara's coat shifted, the dog's body flinched. A memory rose in Nolan before he could stop it. Reed Callahan standing under fluorescent lights 3 years earlier, face drawn, voice low. Some things don't look wrong until you stop trusting the uniform. Nolan had trusted the uniform. Then Reed was gone. The wind pushed snow across the road in ghostly sheets. Nolan stood. "I'll take them to an independent vet." Mara's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes tightened. "That is not appropriate." "It is now. This animal is under our care." "And she just ran from your care carrying a newborn in her mouth." The male attendant shifted nervously. Mara noticed. So did Nolan. For a moment, no one spoke. Silver Paw had a good name in Merrill Creek. Mara knew it. Nolan knew it. But they were standing on a public road beside an open ambulance, a blood thread in the snow, and a mother dog who would rather freeze than go back. Mara forced a thin smile. "At least allow us to follow you to the clinic." Nolan bent and lifted the puppy carefully in both hands. Sable watched every movement, muscles quivering. When he turned toward his truck, she followed so close her shoulder brushed his leg. "No," Nolan said. "I'll call Dr. Rowe." At the name, Mara's smile faded completely. It lasted only a second, but Nolan saw it. He opened the rear door of the pickup and spread Bishop's old wool blanket across the floor. Sable hesitated at the edge of the truck, nose working, eyes fixed on the white ambulance. Then she climbed in, not gracefully, not easily, but with the determination of a mother who had chosen the lesser terror. Nolan placed the puppy against her belly. She curled around it at once. Before Nolan shut the door, Sable lifted her head and looked past him, at Mara, at the logo, at the open ambulance. There was no confusion in that look, no madness, no unstable rage, only a promise. Never again. Nolan got behind the wheel and pulled away slowly. In the mirror, Mara stood in the falling snow, white coat bright against the dark pines. The young attendant said something to her, but she did not answer. She was watching Nolan's truck as if she had not lost a dog, as if she had lost control of a secret. For the first mile, Nolan drove without speaking. The puppy's tiny cries rose and fell behind him. Sable answered each sound with a low, trembling whine. Every few seconds, Nolan glanced into the rearview mirror. Sable's amber eyes kept finding his, not pleading now, not trusting either, measuring, remembering. Then she moved. Weakly, painfully, she twisted her head toward her own shoulder and began worrying at something caught beneath the fur near her collar. Nolan slowed the truck. A cracked plastic tag fell onto the floor mat behind the driver's seat. At the next pullout, he stopped. He reached back carefully. Sable stiffened but did not snap. Nolan picked up the tag between two fingers and held it under the dashboard light. The plastic was scratched, the edges chewed or broken. Most of the printed label had been worn away, but 4 lines remained. RC-04NW hold litter. Nolan stared at it. The truck heater blew warm air over his hands, but his fingers went cold. RC could mean anything: a file code, a contract label, a meaningless administrative mark from a sanctuary that handled too many dogs and too much paperwork. But inside Nolan's mind, those 2 letters opened a door he had spent 3 years trying to keep shut. Reed Callahan, the friend who had warned him, the brother in arms Nolan had not believed, the dead man whose final concern had involved working dogs, private transfers, and a report Nolan had dismissed because it sounded too strange, too messy, too dangerous to touch. Behind him, Sable lowered her head over her puppy and watched Nolan through the mirror. Not like a stray, not like a frightened animal, like a witness waiting to see if this man would fail to listen again. Nolan put the truck back in gear. The road ahead bent into the trees, toward his cabin, toward warmth, toward questions he did not want and could no longer leave behind. And as the snow thickened over the windshield, one thought settled in him with the weight of a verdict. If RC was only a silver paw file code, why did it feel like the first voice from Reed Callahan's grave? Nolan Pierce did not drive toward town. The road to Merrow Creek bent left beyond the frozen bridge, where the clinic lights would still be on and people would ask questions. Nolan kept the wheel straight. His old pickup climbed the narrow road into the pines, tires crunching over snow that had not yet been ruined by other vehicles. Behind him, in the rear of the cab, the mother German shepherd lay curled around her newborn pup, every breath shallow, every muscle ready to move if the wrong sound came too close. Nolan knew he might be making a mistake. That was what made his hands tighten on the wheel. If Dr. Mara Voss had told the truth, if Sable truly needed emergency treatment, then Nolan was letting old guilt make decisions for a living animal. He had seen men do that before. Men who confused instinct with fear. Men who thought suspicion made them wise. He had no desire to become one of them. But when he glanced into the mirror, Sable's amber eyes were open. She was not watching the road. She was watching the darkness behind them. That was what kept him driving. His cabin sat nearly 10 miles from town, tucked at the end of a private road where the forest thickened and the cell signal weakened. It was not large, a single-story structure of dark timber and stone, with a low porch, a metal roof, and windows that reflected more trees than light. Snow had gathered along the railing and over the woodpile stacked beneath the tarp. The place looked less like a home than a position a man had chosen because it had only one road in. Nolan parked close to the side entrance and shut off the engine. For a moment, he sat still. The sudden silence filled the truck. In the rear cab, the puppy made a faint sound, no louder than a breath caught inside a fist. Sable answered with a low whine, her muzzle pressing to the pup's tiny body. "All right," Nolan said softly. "Let's get you warm." He moved slowly when he opened the door. Sable lifted her head, ears pinned, but she did not growl. Snow blew in around Nolan's boots as he reached for the old wool blanket beneath her. It had once belonged to Bishop, the German shepherd who had been Nolan's shadow through the first lonely years after the Navy. Bishop had been black and tan too, heavier through the chest, stubborn as a locked gate, gentle with children, and the only creature that never seemed bothered by Nolan's silences. The blanket still held a memory of him. Maybe Sable smelled it. Maybe that was why she allowed Nolan to lift the edges around her and guide her out instead of forcing her. He carried the puppy in both hands while Sable followed so closely her shoulder brushed his leg. The cold had made her clumsy. Her black and gold coat hung damp around her belly, and every few steps she glanced back toward the driveway, as if expecting white doors to swing open from the trees. Inside, the cabin was clean, orderly, and painfully bare. A leather chair faced the stone fireplace. A wooden table sat near the kitchen window. One mug waited upside down beside the sink. There were no family photographs on the walls, no holiday cards, no clutter gathered from a life shared with others. Near the front door, Bishop's old leather collar hung from a hook, its brass buckle dulled by time. Nolan saw Sable notice it. Her nose lifted. For a second, something passed through her expression that looked almost like recognition, though Nolan knew better than to give human names to animal grief. Still, she looked at the collar longer than she looked at anything else in the room. Nolan brought her to the laundry room beside the fireplace wall. It was small, but warmest after the main room, with a tile floor, a utility sink, shelves of tools, and enough space for blankets. He spread Bishop's wool blanket first, then added 2 dry towels from the cabinet. He placed the puppy near Sable's belly and stepped back immediately. The shepherd lowered herself with a careful groan and wrapped her body around the pup. Nolan set down a bowl of warm water. Then he opened a can of soft food he kept for no reason he had ever admitted to himself. It had expired last month. He threw it away and opened another from the emergency pantry. Plain chicken and rice, safe enough until a vet could look at her. Sable did not touch it. She kept her head low, eyes fixed on the doorway. Nolan did not stare. He knew better. He sat on the floor just outside the laundry room, his back turned slightly, one knee raised, hands open and still. "You don't have to trust me," he said. "Just don't run back into the cold." The puppy moved weakly against its mother, searching. Nolan listened to the tiny, uneven sounds and felt a pressure gather under his ribs. He had held wounded men who weighed 200 pounds and somehow felt less fragile than that pup. After a while, he reached for his phone and called the one person in Merrow Creek who might still choose the animal over the institution. Dr. Elias Rowe answered on the 5th ring. His voice was rough with age and sleep. "Pierce? I need you at my cabin." A pause. "What kind of need?" "A mother shepherd, just delivered, 1 newborn with her, both cold. The mother came out of Silver Paw's ambulance." Another pause, longer this time. When Rowe spoke again, the sleep was gone from his voice. "I'll bring my bag." Dr. Elias Rowe arrived 40 minutes later in an old green Subaru that complained all the way up Nolan's driveway. He was a tall, thin man in his early 70s, with narrow shoulders, white hair so fine it lifted in the wind, and a face lined by years of weather, animals, and disappointments he had never fully explained. His hands had a slight tremor when he removed his gloves. But Nolan had seen those hands steady around injured dogs, frightened horses, and once a trapped fox with a broken leg. Rowe was not soft. He was careful, which was rarer. He did not wear a white coat. Instead, he wore a heavy brown sweater beneath an old olive wax jacket, dark work pants, snow boots, and a gray wool scarf. In one hand, he carried a worn leather veterinary bag, the kind that looked older than some buildings in town. At the door, Rowe glanced at Nolan's camouflage shirt, then at the snow still melting on his boots. "You look like trouble found you again." Nolan stepped aside. It was standing in the road. Rowe did not smile. The moment he entered the laundry room, Sable raised her head. Her body tensed, but she did not bare her teeth. Rowe stopped at the threshold and lowered himself slowly onto one knee, ignoring the cold tile. "Well, hello there," he murmured. "You've had a hard day, haven't you?" Sable watched him with the distrust of a creature who had learned that gentle voices did not always mean gentle hands. Rowe opened his bag carefully. When he removed a roll of white gauze, Sable recoiled so sharply that her back hit the dryer. Her body curled over the puppy, a low sound rising in her throat. Rowe froze. Then, without a word, he put the gauze away and closed the bag halfway. Nolan saw the old vet's face change, not with fear, with recognition. "Noted," Rowe said softly. He took off his scarf, rolled it into a pad, and placed it on the floor between himself and Sable. Then he sat back and waited. Minutes passed. The fire popped in the next room. Wind moved against the windows. The puppy rooted blindly against its mother's fur. Finally, Sable stretched her neck forward and sniffed the scarf. Ro did not move. Only after Sable withdrew without growling did he begin the examination. He used no sudden gestures. He warmed the stethoscope head in his palm. He spoke to the dog more than to Nolan, his voice low, almost apologetic. Sable flinched twice, but allowed it. "She's exhausted," Ro said. "Recently delivered. Some minor tearing, dehydration, stress. Nothing I'd call immediately life-threatening if she stays warm and calm." "And the pup?" Ro lifted the newborn with both hands. The tiny body fit inside his palms, black along the spine, pale gold at the throat, damp fur beginning to dry in uneven tufts. Its eyes were sealed, its mouth opened in a silent little protest, then closed again. Cold, weak, needs to nurse, needs warmth, but alive. Nolan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Sable reached toward the pup. Ro returned it immediately. "Easy, Mama. I'm not taking him." The word him settled in the room. Nolan looked down at the pup. "Ash," he said. Ro glanced over. Nolan shrugged once, almost embarrassed. "Color of him?" "Ash," Ro repeated. "All right then." For the first time since the road, Sable lowered her head enough to lick the puppy without staring at the door. It was a small thing, but Nolan felt it. A crack in winter. A living creature deciding for one breath not to expect the worst. Then Ro's fingers paused near the pup's ear. "What?" Nolan asked. The old vet tilted Ash's head gently toward the light. Beneath the tiny folded ear, almost hidden in the soft fur, was a small blue mark. Not a bruise, not dirt. A dot of ink, precise and deliberate. Nolan leaned closer. "What is that?" Ro did not answer at once. He sat back, the puppy still in his hands, and the silence that followed was not medical. It was personal. "Some facilities mark pups for record keeping," Ro said finally. "Color codes, litter positions, health categories. It can be legitimate." "But?" Ro looked at the pup, then at Sable. "But this little one is only hours old." If that mark came from Silver Paw, they didn't wait long enough for his mother to settle. Maybe not even long enough for her to clean him. Sable's ears moved at the sound of his voice. She did not understand the words, but Nolan thought she understood the weight. The dog shifted then, slowly, painfully, and placed one paw over Ash, as if covering the blue mark from view. That was the re-hooking moment that stilled both men, because it did not look random. It looked protective in a way that went beyond instinct. Like Sable knew that tiny mark meant selection, separation, a decision already made about a life too young to open its eyes. Ro swallowed. Nolan felt the room grow colder despite the fire. "What did they do to you?" he whispered. Sable stared at him, amber eyes unblinking. And for a moment, Nolan had the strange, unwanted feeling that the dog was not asking him to save what was in front of him. She was asking whether he would understand what had already been taken. The thought passed through him like a draft under a locked door. Ro placed Ash back against Sable and began packing part of his bag. Nolan reached into his pocket and withdrew the cracked plastic tag from the truck. He handed it over without speaking. Ro read it under the laundry room light. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Almost. But Nolan had spent a lifetime noticing almost. "You know it," Nolan said. "I know pieces of it." "Then give me the pieces." Ro turned the tag once between his fingers. "NW likely means North Wing." "At Silver Paw?" Ro nodded. "What is North Wing?" "On paper? Behavioral rehabilitation. Medical isolation. Dogs too frightened for public kennels. Too reactive for volunteers. Too fragile for adoption events. A place to stabilize them." "And off paper?" The old vet looked toward Sable. "I left before I could answer that cleanly." Nolan studied him. "That sounds like a convenient sentence." "It's an honest one." Ro's voice had sharpened, but not in anger, in shame. "I worked there years ago before Mara ran the medical side, before the expansion. Silver Paw did good work, real work. Dogs came in half dead and left with names, beds, people who cried when they adopted them. Don't make the mistake of thinking a place is false just because something rotten found a room inside it. Nolan absorbed that. It made things worse, not better. What about RC04? Could be a rehabilitation contract. Could be an internal transfer category. Could be nothing. You don't believe that? No. The answer was quiet enough to be almost missed. Nolan looked back at Sable. Hold litter. Rose's jaw tightened. That is the part I like least. Before Nolan could ask another question, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Both men looked toward the sound. Sable jerked upright, hackles lifting along her spine. Nolan walked out and checked the screen. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Nolan Pierce. For 2 seconds, there was only static. Then a woman's recorded voice from Silver Paw's public line began politely informing him that after-hours emergencies should be directed to the sanctuary's medical team. A beep followed, then silence. No message. The call ended. Nolan stared at the phone. Roe had followed him into the doorway. Who was it? Silver Paw's emergency line. Did you call them? No. They stood in that stillness a moment too long. Then from the laundry room came the faint scrape of claws. Sable had risen, not to eat, not to drink. She was pushing Ash with her nose, dragging him gently away from the warmest corner of the blanket and toward the gap between the washer and the wall. A narrow, shadowed space, too small for comfort, better for hiding. Nolan stepped closer but stopped when she looked at him. Her eyes were wide now, not wild, listening. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. The cabin creaked as old wood settled in the cold. Roe lowered his voice. She thinks someone is coming. Nolan crossed to the window beside the back door and killed the interior light before looking out. Snow reflected the faint moonlight. The yard was empty. The wood pile sat undisturbed. The trees beyond the driveway were dark and still. He almost turned away. Then he saw the tracks. Not footprints, tire tracks, fresh enough that the falling snow had not filled them yet. They stopped near the far bend of the driveway, just beyond the reach of his porch light. Whoever had driven there had not come all the way to the cabin. They had stopped where a person could look through the trees, wait, decide, and turn around. Nolan opened the back door slowly. Cold rolled in. Sable let out a low, broken sound from the laundry room. Not a bark, not quite a whine. The tracks curved away toward the road. No vehicle now, only the proof that one had been there. Roe stood behind Nolan, his old face grim. Mara has friends. Nolan closed the door. He locked it. Then the front one. Then the side entrance. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not pace. He simply moved through the cabin with the old, efficient calm returning to his body, checking windows, lowering blinds, turning off lights that made the inside visible from the trees. But inside, he was not calm. Inside, a different door had opened. He remembered Reed's last message again, not the words this time, but the tone. Tired, frustrated, hurt that Nolan had not believed him quickly enough. Back then, Nolan had told himself that Reed needed rest, that the system was complicated, that one strange report did not prove anything, that good organizations could make mistakes without being corrupt. All reasonable thoughts, all comfortable thoughts. A few days later, Reed was dead. Nolan looked at Sable hiding her puppy in the narrow space beside the washer and felt the old shame settle over him with terrible familiarity. Roe stayed until nearly midnight. He left instructions written in block letters. Warmth, fluids, quiet, nursing, watch for fever, call if bleeding increased, keep stress low. He gave Nolan a small packet of safe supplements for the mother and a heating pad set on low beneath towels, positioned so Sable could move away if she chose. At the door, Roe paused. If Silver Paw calls the sheriff, he'll come. I know. Harlan isn't a bad man. I know that too. He owes Silver Paw more than you think. Nolan studied him. What does that mean? Roe looked tired suddenly, older than when he arrived. It means this town has a long memory for kindness, sometimes longer than it has for questions. He left before Nolan could ask more. The cabin settled into the deep hours. Nolan did not sleep. He sat on the floor outside the laundry room with his back against the wall where Sable could see him without feeling cornered. He kept the lights low and the fire steady. Every so often, Ash made a faint sound, and Sable answered. Around 2 in the morning, the mother dog finally lowered her head enough to close her eyes. Nolan thought that was the beginning of rest. It was not. Just before dawn, Sable woke with a jerk. She lifted Ash by the scruff, carried him off the blanket, then brought him back. She repeated the motion again and again, each time more frantic, as if some part of her body believed another puppy should be there. Her nose searched the towel, the corner, the space under the shelf. Then she stood over Ash, trembling. Nolan did not move. He understood missing something you could not retrieve. Is there another one? He whispered. Sable only stared toward the back door. Morning came pale and hard. At 7:14, Nolan's phone rang. This time the caller ID showed Sheriff Cole Harlan. No one answered. Pierce. Cole Harlan's voice came through low and steady. He was a man in his late 50s, broad-faced, with salt and pepper hair under a sheriff's hat, and a tired decency that made people trust him even when they disagreed with him. He had served Marrow Creek long enough to know the names of most dogs in town and the grudges of most men. Nolan had never disliked him. That did not mean he wanted him involved. Nolan, Harlan said, I got a call from Silverpaw. I assumed you would. They say you took a postpartum shepherd from their care and refused medical return. I took a dog off a public road after she ran from their ambulance with a newborn. A pause. That isn't how they framed it. I bet. Harlan sighed, not angry, burdened. They're claiming the mother has a dangerous file and the pup needs monitored care. They want me to come out and collect them before this turns into something official. Nolan looked into the laundry room. Sable was licking Ash with a tenderness so careful it made something ache in his chest. The tiny blue mark beneath the pup's ear showed whenever his head turned. Cole, Nolan said, if they wanted monitored care, they could have sent another vet with Roe. They didn't. Someone drove up near my cabin last night and turned around in the dark. Silence. When Harlan spoke again, his voice had changed by only a fraction. You sure? I'm looking at the tracks. Another pause. Then Harlan said, don't go anywhere. Nolan ended the call and stood in the quiet kitchen, phone still in his hand. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and indifferent, covering the road, the yard, the tire tracks, and every sign a person might need if they waited too long to look. In the laundry room, Sable lifted her amber eyes to him. Beside Ash's folded ear, the blue mark remained. And Nolan could no longer pretend this was only a frightened mother in a confused rescue center. If Silverpaw only wanted to save the puppy, why had someone come close enough in the night to watch the cabin and leave before help arrived? By mid-morning, the snow had stopped falling, but the world outside Nolan Pierce's cabin still looked unfinished. The sky hung low and pale over the pines. Every branch carried white weight. Every fence post wore a rounded cap of frost. The road out of the woods was quiet except for the slow grind of Nolan's tires as he drove toward Marrow Creek alone. He had left Sable and Ash at the cabin with fresh water, heat, and the careful instructions Dr. Rowe had written in block letters. He did not like leaving them. The feeling sat under his ribs like a stone. But he knew going to Silverpaw with the mother dog would only hand Mara Voss the chance she wanted, so he went alone. Nolan wore the same green camouflage long-sleeve field set, clean and fitted, the sleeves buttoned at the wrists, his dark winter boots still marked with snow from the cabin steps. At 55, with his broad shoulders, clean-shaven, angular face, neat undercut touched with silver, and steady-sad eyes, He looked like a man who belonged more to discipline than comfort. People in town knew he had been a Navy SEAL. Most did not know what that meant beyond the myth of it. They imagined strength, courage, maybe danger. They did not imagine the quieter things, the doubt that came afterward, the names that stayed, the moments a man replayed until memory became punishment. The Silver Paw Sanctuary sat on the north edge of Merrill Creek, beyond the church, the feed store, and the small elementary school with its flag snapping in the cold. From the road, it looked exactly the way a place called a sanctuary should look. A white wooden fence circled the front property. A carved sign hung between two posts, painted blue and silver, with a familiar paw print logo centered above the words, Silver Paw Sanctuary, a last home for the ones left behind. Someone had hung evergreen garland along the fence. Red ribbons moved gently in the wind. A few old dogs wandered in a fenced yard near the main building, bundled in knitted sweaters. One gray-muzzled golden retriever limped happily after a volunteer carrying a bucket. A small terrier with cloudy eyes stood under a heat lamp, tail wagging at nothing in particular. It did not look like a place a mother dog would run from. That was what made Nolan slow down before he parked. He watched through the windshield for a full minute. Volunteers moved in and out with food bowls and folded blankets. A woman laughed when an elderly beagle planted himself on her boot and refused to move. Somewhere inside, a dog barked twice, then another answered. Normal sounds, warm sounds. The kind of sounds that made donors open their wallets and lonely people remember hope. Nolan stepped out. The cold touched his face. The air smelled of snow, pine, coffee, wet fur, and disinfectant used lightly enough not to feel harsh. Everything was clean without looking sterile. Someone had worked hard to make this place feel safe. Inside the main building, heat wrapped around him. The lobby had wood floors, framed adoption photos, baskets of donated toys, and a large bulletin board covered with handwritten notes from families. Thank you for saving Rosie. Max is sleeping on our couch now. Old dogs deserve Christmas too. Nolan read none of them for long. A tall, mixed-breed dog with a white muzzle slept on a padded bed near the reception desk. Its breathing was slow, peaceful, trusting. Beside it, an older woman knelt to adjust its blanket. She looked up when Nolan entered. She was around 68, short and slightly round, with short silver curls escaping from beneath a red knit cap. Her cheeks were pink from work, her hands rough and reddened by cold, and dog hair clung stubbornly to her burgundy puffer jacket. Fingerless wool gloves covered her hands. Around her neck hung a volunteer badge that read, June Keller. June had the face of someone who had spent years caring for things too weak to thank her properly. Kind, but not fragile. Soft-eyed, but not easily fooled. You're Nolan Pierce, she said. It was not a question. I am. June stood slowly, one hand pressing her lower back. I remember you from the fundraiser. You donated after losing your dog. Nolan's eyes flicked to the sleeping dog. Bishop. German Shepherd, wasn't he? Nolan nodded once. June's expression softened, but she did not reach for sympathy the way some people did. She only said, They leave such loud, empty spaces for animals that never spoke. The sentence landed closer than Nolan wanted. Before he could answer, a door opened behind the reception desk, and Evelyn Hart walked in. The founder of Silver Paw was smaller in person than she looked in local newspaper photos. She was 67, perhaps, thin but upright, with silver hair pinned into a low bun and a cream-colored cardigan hanging over a pale blue shirt. A blue-silver scarf rested at her throat, the same colors as the sanctuary logo. Her face was lined but gentle, with tired hazel eyes that seemed used to looking at suffering and trying to make room for it. She held a clipboard against her chest, not like a shield, but like something that kept her hands busy. Mr. Pierce, she said. Her voice was warm, controlled, and sad before the conversation had even begun. Mrs. Hart? Evelyn, please. Everyone calls me Evelyn here. Nolan did not offer the same softness back. You know why I'm here. I believe I do. Evelyn glanced toward June, then toward the hallway beyond the lobby. Would you walk with me? He followed her through a wide corridor lined with framed photographs of old dogs. Under each picture was a name and a date. Some had small brass plates, passed peacefully in care. Others had adoption notes. The place did not hide death, but it softened the edges of it with blankets, warm lighting, and handwritten love. Evelyn spoke as they walked. My husband died 11 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. We had an old collie named Mercy. She was nearly blind by then, hips failing, stubborn as winter. For 6 months after Henry died, Mercy was the only reason I got out of bed. She needed pills. She needed food. She needed to be carried down the steps. Evelyn smiled faintly. I used to think I was keeping her alive. Later I understood she was keeping me alive. Nolan said nothing. I started Silver Paw because old dogs are easy to forget, she continued. They are expensive, inconvenient, sometimes messy, almost never chosen first, but they still know when someone has stayed. They passed a room where 3 elderly dogs slept under heat lamps. A volunteer sat in a chair reading aloud from a paperback novel. One dog lifted its head as Evelyn passed, and she paused to touch its ear. That touch was real. Nolan hated that. It would have been easier if Silver Paw had looked false. Evelyn turned to him near a window facing the snowy yard. Sable needs to come back. Nolan kept his voice level. She ran from your ambulance. She ran from treatment. She placed her puppy at my feet. Evelyn's face tightened with concern. Fear can make animals do things that look meaningful to us. I know how compelling that can be, especially for someone with your background. His eyes narrowed slightly. Evelyn did not seem to notice the warning in it, or perhaps she noticed and chose gentleness anyway. You are a protector, she said. That is clear. But sometimes protectors mistake control for safety. The words struck too close. Nolan saw Reed Callahan for half a second, not as a ghost but as memory. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, a voice asking Nolan to read one more file, call one more person, look one more time. Nolan had told him to sleep, to stop chasing shadows, to trust the review process. Protectors mistake control for safety. Maybe they did, but sometimes institutions mistook silence for mercy. Before Nolan could answer, another door opened. Dr. Mara Voss entered the corridor with a folder in one hand. Her ash blonde hair was tied back neatly. Her thick white medical coat was spotless, the Silver Paw logo bright over her left breast. Beneath it, she wore a gray turtleneck and dark slacks tucked into clean medical boots. Everything about her looked professional, composed, and difficult to move. Her pale eyes met Nolan's without apology. Mr. Pierce, she said, I'm glad you came in person. Misunderstandings become dangerous when people only speak through fear. Nolan looked at the folder. That's Sable's file? Yes, Mara handed it to him. Inside were printed medical notes, intake forms, vaccination records, behavioral observations, and a postpartum incident report. The language was neat and clinical. Sable was described as defensive, reactive under stress, highly protective of neonates, and a risk for accidental injury to offspring during panic episodes. Nolan read carefully. Mara watched him. She was recovered from a neglected breeding situation, Mara said. We stabilized her. We monitored her pregnancy. During delivery, she became disoriented and defensive. One staff member was bitten when attempting to assist a pup. Bad bite? Not severe, but enough to establish risk. Where is that staff member? Home today. Nolan looked up. Convenient. Mara's expression did not change. Necessary. He was shaken. Evelyn stepped in softly. No one here wants to punish Sable. We want to keep her alive. Her and the puppy. Nolan returned to the paperwork. He wanted to dismiss it. That would have been simple, but parts of it made sense. A mother dog under stress could become defensive. A newborn could fail quickly without proper support. A man living alone in a cabin was not a neonatal unit. For one moment, doubt opened its jaws. What if he had taken a frightened animal from the only place equipped to help? What if the thing inside him that screamed danger was not instinct, but guilt wearing instinct's clothes? Then his eyes stopped on a date. He read it once, then again. The delivery record stated that Sable's male pup had been logged the morning before Nolan found her on the road. Nolan held the page toward Mara. This birth time is wrong. Mara leaned in, glanced at the line, then looked back at him. A clerical mistake, she said. You log births a day early, often? We handle hundreds of animals every year. Intake systems autofill. Volunteers make entries. Staff correct them later. Nolan studied her face. There it was again. The answer that sounded possible enough to make accusation look unreasonable. But Mara's eyes had sharpened by 1 degree. That was the rehook moment Nolan could not ignore. Not the wrong date itself, the way Evelyn saw it too. For less than a second, the founder of Silverpaw looked at the file not with confusion, but with fear. Small, quickly hidden, swallowed behind her warm, public face. It was the look of a woman who had just recognized a crack in a wall she had spent years refusing to touch. Then it vanished. Evelyn folded her hands. Mara closed the folder, and Nolan understood something colder than suspicion. At least one of them knew that mistake was not just a mistake. Mara extended her hand for the file. We can correct the record. Nolan did not give it back immediately. I'd like a copy. That would require authorization. I'm asking, and I'm answering according to policy. June Keller appeared at the far end of the hallway, carrying a stack of clean blankets. She had clearly heard enough to understand tension, though not enough to know its shape. Her eyes moved from Nolan to Mara to Evelyn. Evelyn, June said quietly, Mr. Pritchard is coughing again. Evelyn's face softened at once. I'll come. Mara took the file from Nolan's hand. Return Sable voluntarily. Let us treat her. That is the kindest thing you can do. Nolan looked toward the room of old dogs. Kindness seems to do a lot of work around here. Mara's mouth tightened. June watched him for a moment, then shifted the blankets against her chest. If you're going to shake this place, Mr. Pierce, she said, not unkindly, remember something. Some of these dogs won't survive being moved twice. The words stopped him more effectively than Mara's file had. He looked past her into the recovery room. A blind beagle slept with its nose tucked under a fleece blanket. A gray shepherd mix stood trembling near a water bowl until a volunteer steadied its hips. The golden retriever in the red sweater leaned against the glass, looking at Nolan with cloudy, trusting eyes. They were not part of any lie. They were lives, fragile ones. Nolan had come looking for something wrong and found something worse. A place where wrong could hide behind the genuinely good. That made every choice heavier. I'm not here to hurt them, he said. June's expression did not change. Most damage doesn't start with people meaning to. Nolan left the main hallway with that sentence following him. He moved slowly, not wandering exactly, but allowing the building to reveal itself. Reception, public kennel, grooming room, storage, food pantry, medical hall, everything labeled, everything warm, everything open enough to reassure donors, until the back corridor. There the lighting changed, not dramatically, just enough. The cheerful framed photos stopped. The walls became plain. A camera watched from the ceiling corner. A keypad locked a metal door at the end of the hall. Before Nolan could step closer, a young woman carrying a stack of folders came around the corner and nearly ran into him. She froze. Lena Ortiz was about 29, small-framed and tired-looking, with medium brown skin, dark brown hair tied low at the nape of her neck, and large eyes that moved too quickly for someone with nothing to hide. She wore a moss-green hoodie under a gray Silverpaw staff vest. Her employee badge hung crooked, half turned against her chest, as if she had developed the habit of not wanting her name seen too clearly. Sorry, she said. No harm. She looked over her shoulder, then past Nolan toward the camera. "You shouldn't be back here." I got turned around. "No, you didn't." There was no accusation in her voice, only fear. Nolan looked at her properly then. She was not like Mara, polished and controlled. Not like Evelyn, warm and burdened. Lena had the brittle stillness of someone who had spent too long carrying a secret too big for her body. "What's behind that door?" he asked. Her fingers tightened around the folders. "Dogs that don't do well with strangers." That the official answer? "It's the one people keep their jobs with." Footsteps sounded somewhere beyond the corner. Lena moved quickly. She shifted the folders to one arm, brushed past Nolan, and as she did, pressed a folded slip of paper into his palm. Her voice dropped to a whisper so faint he almost missed it. "If she brought you the pup, she didn't just escape." Then she continued down the hall as if nothing had happened. Nolan closed his hand around the paper, but did not open it immediately. He turned away from the camera, walked back toward the lobby, and only when he reached a small alcove near a supply shelf did he unfold it. It was a rough map. Not detailed, but enough. Main building, senior yard, medical room, food storage, staff entrance. Then at the rear of the property, beyond the public walkways, a section circled hard enough that the pen had nearly torn the paper. North wing. Under it, 3 lines. No volunteers, no public records, no barking after midnight. Nolan read the last line twice. No barking after midnight was not a policy. It was a symptom. From somewhere outside came a sound. 3 short whistle notes. Sharp, measured. Not loud, but clean enough to cut through walls. Nolan turned toward the yard. The change was immediate. The elderly dogs near the fence stopped moving. A volunteer with a bowl paused mid-step. In the room behind glass, even the coughing dog quieted. It was not the natural hush of animals listening to a familiar command. It was too complete, too sudden. A silence with fear pressed into its seams. Nolan moved to the nearest window. Across the snowy yard, beyond the cheerful fence in the public kennels, stood a second building partially hidden by pines. It was older than the main sanctuary, long and gray, with narrow windows and a fenced side entrance. No garland, no adoption photos, no volunteer laughter. North wing. A shape appeared behind an upper window. A German shepherd, old, large, yellow and black, with silver around the muzzle and a broad, disciplined chest. He stood very still behind the frosted glass, not frantic, not barking, not throwing himself at the pain. His ears were up. His eyes, though Nolan could not fully see them from that distance, seemed fixed in his direction with terrible calm. Then the dog lifted his right paw, pressed it once against the lower frame, lowered it, pressed it again, twice. Nolan's breath stopped. The world narrowed to that window, that paw, that impossible signal. It was not Bishop. Nolan knew that immediately. Bishop was buried beneath the pines behind his cabin, beneath a flat stone Nolan had placed there with both hands. This dog was older in the face, heavier in the chest, scarred in ways Bishop had never been. But the signal was real. 2 taps. Handler down. Reed Callahan had taught it as a grim joke first, back when he and Nolan were younger, and believed the worst things could be survived if you named them before they happen. Later, Reed had trained it into one working dog as a real distress cue. Nolan had seen it only a handful of times. He had never seen it from a dog he did not know. Behind him, Mara's voice came from the hallway. "Mr. Pierce." Nolan turned slowly. She stood 10 yards away, white coat bright under the warm lights. Evelyn was beside her, face pale. June had stopped near the lobby entrance with the blankets still in her arms. Lena was nowhere visible. Mara's eyes flicked to Nolan's closed fist, where the folded map rested, then to the window, then back to him. "Visitors are not permitted in restricted areas," she said. Nolan looked once more toward North Wing. The German shepherd was still there, still watching, still silent. Nolan slipped the paper into his pocket. I'm beginning to understand that. Mara stepped closer, her expression calm for anyone who did not know how to read restraint. Return Sable, she said, before this becomes something none of us can undo. There it was again, not concern, control. Nolan walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. Outside, the winter air struck his face and cleared nothing. He crossed the parking lot slowly, feeling the map in his pocket like a live coal. In the main yard, the old dogs had begun moving again. Volunteers resumed their work. Somewhere, someone laughed carefully, as if trying to convince the morning that nothing had happened. Nolan reached his truck and looked back. Silver Paw stood bright and gentle against the snow. A sanctuary, a promise, a place with too many smiles. At the upper window of North Wing, the old German shepherd had vanished. But Nolan still saw the paw lift. Once, twice. And as he started the engine, he knew the question was no longer whether Sable had been afraid. The question was how a dog locked inside Silverpaw knew a signal that belonged to Reed Callahan, Nolan Pierce, and a truth buried years ago. Nolan Pierce drove home with the folded map in his jacket pocket and a silence inside him that felt heavier than the snow. Silverpaw disappeared behind him mile by mile, its white fence and warm windows swallowed by pine shadows in winter glare. But the feeling of the place stayed with him. Not the ugly part, that would have been easier to carry. What stayed was the kindness, the old dogs sleeping under blankets, June Keller's red, work-worn hands tucking fleece around a blind beagle, Evelyn Hart's tired voice speaking about grief and mercy. A lie wrapped in cruelty could be cut apart. A lie wrapped in real kindness was harder. Nolan kept one hand steady on the wheel. His face, clean-shaven and sharply cut, remained calm in the rearview mirror, but his eyes gave him away. They were darker now, pulled inward. At 55, he had learned to keep his body disciplined even when his mind wanted to fracture. The green camouflage sleeves across his forearms were still neat. His posture still controlled, but control did not mean peace. He was afraid of two things. One, that Silverpaw was hiding something terrible. Two, that he wanted it to be true because then Reed Callahan would stop being a man Nolan had failed and become a warning Nolan had finally understood. That second fear shamed him. By the time he reached the cabin, the afternoon light had gone blue. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin line. Dr. Rowe's old Subaru was parked near the porch, half covered in fresh powder. The sight steadied Nolan more than he expected. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, warm towels, and wet dog. Dr. Elias Rowe sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold between his hands. The old veterinarian looked even more tired than he had the night before. His white hair stood in loose wisps from his forehead, and the lines around his mouth seemed deeper. He had removed his olive jacket and sat in his brown sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows, as if he had been working for hours. "She's better," Rose said before Nolan could ask. "Not well, better." Nolan looked toward the laundry room. Sable lay on the wool blanket with Ash tucked against her belly. The mother German shepherd lifted her head when Nolan entered. Her black and gold coat had dried into rough waves, still dull from stress but no longer dripping. Her amber eyes followed him, wary but not panicked. Ash, tiny and dark-backed with pale gold under his chin, moved against her in small, blind nudges. Nolan took off his boots by the door and stepped closer slowly. Sable did not growl. That was new. He stopped at the edge of the room. "Hey, girl." Sable watched him for a long moment. Then, with careful effort, she shifted one paw and pulled Ash a few inches closer to Nolan's boot. Not far, not enough to hand him over. Just enough to say she had stopped seeing him as the first danger in the room. It should not have affected him as much as it did. Nolan lowered himself to sit on the floor outside the laundry room. His back found the wall, his knees bent. He let his hands rest open where Sable could see them. For nearly a minute, no one spoke. Then Rose set something on the table, a folded county map of Merrill Creek. "I brought that from my truck," Rose said. Old habit. Roads out here change names depending on who's giving directions. Nolan stood and brought out the folded paper Lena had slipped into his hand at Silverpaw. He laid it beside the county map. Roe did not touch it at first. He only looked. The rough drawing showed Silverpaw's public buildings, its staff entrance, and the circled section at the rear, north wing. Roe's jaw moved once, as if he had almost said something and decided against it. Nolan opened the larger map and marked his cabin with a pencil, then the main road. Then Silverpaw, then the low creek bed behind the sanctuary property, barely visible on the printed terrain lines. At the sound of pencil against paper, Sable raised her head. Nolan looked at her. She was staring at the map. "She can't understand that," Rose said quietly. "No," Nolan answered, "but she understands me looking at where she came from." He touched Silverpaw's location with the pencil tip. Sable stood so fast Ash rolled softly against the blanket. She nudged him back, then stepped out of the laundry room on unsteady legs. Nolan remained still. Roe did too. Sable crossed the floor, her nails clicking once, twice, 3 times on the wood. She lowered her nose to the map, sniffed the pencil mark, then moved left. Not toward the main entrance, not toward the public road. Her paw came down on the thin line of the creek bed behind the property. Roe stopped breathing for a second. Sable pressed harder, claws crinkling the map. Then she looked at the back door. Nolan felt the hairs rise along his neck. "She remembers the way out," he said. Roe's voice was low. "Or the way back." The words settled over the room. Sable moved her paw again, not randomly, but along the creek line, following it until it met a patch of timber behind Silverpaw. Her body trembled with the effort, but she did not stop until her paw reached the marked rear boundary. Then she returned to Ash, lowered herself beside him, and began licking his head with fierce, nervous care. That was the re-hook Nolan could not explain away. It was not a trick, not proof in the legal sense, not enough to accuse anyone of anything. But a mother dog who had almost collapsed in the snow had just crossed a room to touch the one route no public visitor would use. Nolan stared at the map and felt something inside him shift from suspicion to dread. Sable had not only escaped, some part of her was still trying to finish the escape. Roe rubbed both hands over his face. Working dogs can hold spatial memory in ways people underestimate. Smell, slope, wind, metal, water, door sounds. They don't need a map. Their bodies carry one. She was used for that? I don't know. You keep saying that because I don't know enough to lie cleanly. Nolan looked at him. Roe's eyes, pale blue and worn, held guilt without defense. I left Silverpaw when North Wing changed, he said. At first, it was exactly what they said. A quiet place for dogs that couldn't handle the public kennels. Dogs that bit because they were terrified. Dogs that shut down if too many people looked at them. I believed in it. What changed? Access, language, paperwork. Roe tapped the map gently. Good places don't become bad all at once, Nolan. First, someone says a door needs to stay locked for safety. Then someone says records need special handling for privacy. Then a donor funds improvements, but only for certain animals. By the time you realize you're not allowed to ask questions, everyone around you has already learned not to hear them. Nolan thought of Evelyn's warm hallway, of Mara's spotless file, of the old dog behind the distant window. Why didn't you report it? Roe closed his eyes briefly. I reported what I could prove, which was almost nothing. Then Mara suggested I retire before I became a liability to the animals I cared about. He gave a humorless smile. She knew where to press. Old dogs. Yes. The cabin fell quiet again. Outside, wind dragged loose snow off the roof. Nolan looked toward Sable. She left something there. Roe did not answer. He did not have to. Near dusk, headlights appeared far down the private road. Nolan turned off the kitchen light and moved to the window. Sable lifted her head, ears forward. Roe stood slowly, joints stiff, one hand braced on the chair. A small dark sedan stopped near the porch. Not Silverpaw. Lena Ortiz stepped out. She had changed out of her staff vest. Now she wore the same moss green hoodie under a heavy charcoal coat, dark jeans tucked into snow boots, and a gray knit hat pulled low over her dark hair. Her small frame looked swallowed by winter. Even from the window, Nolan could see she was shaking, though whether from cold or fear was unclear. He opened the door before she knocked. Lena looked past him into the dark cabin. "I shouldn't be here." "Then why are you?" Her eyes lifted to his. They were large, brown, and exhausted. "Because she brought you the pup." That was all she said before Nolan stepped aside. Inside, Lena noticed Sable immediately. Her face changed, grief and relief crossing it so quickly she seemed almost younger. Sable stiffened at the sight of a Silverpaw employee, but Lena crouched at once, not reaching, not speaking loudly. "Hi, Mama," Lena whispered. "You made it." Sable watched her. Then slowly she lowered her head back to Ash. Lena's eyes filled, but did not spill.
I didn't think she would. Nolan closed the door. Start at the beginning. Lena wrapped both hands around the mug Ro gave her, though she did not drink. She sat at the edge of the kitchen chair like someone ready to run. Under the coat, her hoodie sleeves were frayed at the cuffs. Her employee badge was gone, but a pale rectangle on the fabric showed where it usually hung. I handle adoption records, she said. Not medical, not contracts. Just placements, transfers, follow-ups. I thought I was doing good work. Were you? At first. She glanced toward Ro. Silverpaw was good. Maybe it still is in places. That's the worst part. Ro said nothing. Lena took a breath. North Wing was supposed to be behavioral rehab. Dogs with trauma. Dogs too scared or reactive for public kennels. Some really did get better there. But after the expansion, Mara started using outside partners. Strain Behavioral Group, Nolan said. Lena's head snapped up. You know that name? I saw a company logo on a supply invoice in one of the hallways. That was not entirely true. He had seen only part of a black emblem on a sealed crate near the rear corridor, but he wanted to see whether the name landed. It did. Lena's fingers tightened around the mug. They call it advanced rehabilitation, working dog placement, specialized handlers. The words always sound clean. The dogs that get transferred are never the sweetest ones or the sickest ones. They're the ones that stay calm when a metal tray drops. The ones that follow scent under stress. The ones that protect without being taught. Nolan looked toward Sable. She was one. Lena nodded. Sable was different. She remembered doors after one pass. She could find the staff exit from the whelping room even after they moved her twice. Mara called it exceptional spatial retention. Ro muttered. Of course she did. What about her litter? Nolan asked. Lena looked down.
The silence was answer enough, but Nolan waited. I only saw part of the record, she said. Sable delivered more than one pup. I don't know how many survived. I know Ash was logged as male one. There were other entries, but they were under restricted review before I could see them. Sable rose at the sound of Ash's name, not because she knew the word, but because Nolan's voice had changed. Lena flinched at the movement, not from fear of Sable, from guilt. I didn't take them, she said, barely above a whisper. I need you to know that. Nolan's voice stayed even. But you wrote something. Her eyes closed. I corrected records, changed statuses, moved files from adoption to transfer categories when Mara signed off. At first, I thought it was normal. Then the follow-up photos stopped coming. Families always send photos, Mr. Pierce. Even bad adopters send one. These dogs just became paperwork. Ro leaned back, face gray with anger. Nolan asked the question that had been burning since Silverpaw. The dog in North Wing, German Shepherd, old, black and tan, muzzle going silver. Lena opened her coat and pulled a folded scan from inside the lining. She had kept it warm and dry against her body. "Atlas," she said. The name changed the air in the room. She unfolded the page. The scan was poor, copied from a record that had been copied before. Part of the upper corner was missing. A photograph showed a large German shepherd, younger then, chest broad, ears high, eyes intensely focused on something beyond the frame. The dog's coat was yellow and black, with a dark saddle and a strong working build. Even in the flat gray print, his discipline showed. Nolan took the page. Below the photo, most of the origin information had been blacked out or lost to bad scanning, but a few lines remained. Closed working dog rehabilitation intake. Handler deceased. Not suitable for public adoption due to response to legacy signal sets. Nolan read the last line twice. Legacy signal sets. Lena pointed to a note near the bottom of the page. "This is why I came." The line was faint, almost swallowed by copy shadow. RC requested no transfer without review. Nolan's grip tightened on the paper. "It doesn't say Reed Callahan," Lena said quickly. "I don't know what RC means. It could be a contract code. It could be someone's initials. It could be nothing." "It isn't nothing." His voice had gone so quiet that Ro looked at him. Lena swallowed. "Do you know who that is?" Nolan did not answer right away. Memory rose in fragments. Reed laughing beside a training field. Reed crouched beside a shepherd with one hand on its chest. Reed arguing with a superior in a hallway. Reed sending one final message Nolan did not answer quickly enough. "Maybe," Nolan said. Lena's phone buzzed. She startled so hard coffee sloshed over the rim of her mug. Nolan's eyes moved to the screen. "Who?" "No name." Her face went pale. "It keeps happening." The phone buzzed again. This time a media file appeared in her messages. No text, just an audio attachment. "Don't open it," Rose said. But Lena had already touched the screen by reflex. A sound filled the kitchen. Tiny cries. Puppies. Not one, several. Thin, urgent, muffled as if recorded through a door. Sable exploded to her feet. Ash rolled against the towel as she spun toward the sound. A broken whine tore from her throat. She ran to Lena, not attacking, but frantic, nose pushing at the phone, then at the door, then back toward the map on the table. Her whole body shook. She pawed once at the floor, then turned toward the back entrance and barked for the first time since Nolan had brought her home. Not loud, not aggressive, a single sharp sound of recognition. Lena covered her mouth. "Oh God." Nolan took the phone and stopped the audio. The silence afterward was worse. Sable stood panting, eyes wide, body pointed toward the door as if the sound had opened a road only she could see. Nolan looked at the map, then at Sable, then at Ash, alone on the blanket. Understanding came slowly, then all at once. Ash was not the litter. Ash was the one she had managed to carry. Nolan crouched in front of Sable. His knees touched the wooden floor. For the first time, he did not keep quite as much distance. "You left them there," he said softly. The words sounded cruel, though he did not mean them that way. Sable's head lowered. She backed toward Ash, touched her nose to him, then looked again at the door. Nolan felt the answer in his chest. She had not abandoned them. She had escaped with the only one close enough to save. And every restless movement since, every attempt to hide Ash, every trembling glance toward the dark, had been the body of a mother still counting the ones missing. Nolan reached out slowly. Sable watched his hand. He stopped an inch from her head, letting her choose. For one long moment, she did nothing. Then she leaned forward. Her forehead touched his palm. Nolan closed his fingers gently against her damp fur. Something inside him broke so quietly, no one else could have heard it. Reed's face came again, but not with accusation this time. Only the memory of a man asking to be believed before the proof was easy. Nolan looked at Lena. "How many?" "I don't know." "Find out." "I can try." "No." Nolan's voice remained calm, but something in it made the room still. You don't try alone, not anymore. Lena nodded, trembling. Roe looked from Nolan to Sable, then to the map. She knows where they are, the old vet said. Nolan kept his hand on Sable's head. The dog did not move away. Outside, beyond the black cabin windows, the snowy woods stretched toward Marrow Creek and the bright, trusted sanctuary behind its white fence. Inside, a mother dog stood between one saved puppy and the road back to the ones she could still hear. And Nolan understood the terrible shape of what he held now. He was not sheltering a runaway dog. He was sheltering the only living witness who remembered the way back to where the rest of her children had been hidden. By morning, Nolan Pierce understood one thing clearly. He could not do this alone. The old version of him wanted to. The part trained by years of silence, pressure, and impossible decisions wanted to load Sable and Ash into the truck, drive straight back to Silver Paw, force open every locked door, and make the truth show itself. That part of him still believed action was cleaner than waiting. But action had ruined men before. So had silence. Nolan stood in his kitchen with the county map spread across the table, Lena's copied record beside it, and Dr. Rowe's handwritten notes under a coffee mug. Sable lay in the laundry room, Ash tucked close to her belly, her amber eyes never quite resting. Every so often she raised her head and looked toward the back door, as if some sound beyond the woods had called her name. Nolan looked at her and thought of the puppies she could not reach. Then he picked up the phone. Sheriff Cole Harlan agreed to meet him at the old municipal building, not the main sheriff's office. That alone told Nolan the man was uneasy. The building sat behind the courthouse, a low brick structure with a flagpole out front and a parking lot scraped clean by the county plow. Nolan arrived first, his green camouflage sleeves buttoned neatly beneath his winter coat, his clean-shaven face hard in the cold. He carried no weapon visible, no folder full of accusations, only copies of what he had. Dr. Rowe's notes, the tag code, a photo of Ash's blue mark, Lena's rough map, and the partial atlas record. Harlan came in through the side door 5 minutes later. Sheriff Cole Harlan was 58, broad through the chest and thick in the hands, with salt and pepper hair cut short beneath his brown winter sheriff's hat. His face was square and weathered, the face of a man who had spent decades driving icy roads to settle neighbor disputes, lost hikers, domestic calls, barn fires, and all the quiet grief small towns carried behind closed doors. His eyes were blue-gray and tired, but not cruel. Nolan had always thought Harlan looked like a man who wanted to believe people could still be decent if given enough chances. That was part of the problem. Harlan removed his hat and set it on the table. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't. Dog still alive?" "Sable is stable. Pup is alive." Harlan gave a small nod. "Good." Nolan pushed the papers across the table. "I need an official investigation." Harlan did not touch them right away. "Nolan," he said carefully, "a scared dog doesn't make a crime." "No, but a scared dog, a false birth date, a hidden wing, restricted records, and someone watching my cabin starts to make one." Harlan's jaw tightened at the mention of the cabin. "You sure about the vehicle?" "Yes. Could have been a neighbor." "I don't have neighbors that far up." The sheriff looked down at the papers then. He read slowly, not because he was slow, but because he did not want to miss what would force him to act. When he reached the rough map of North Wing, his expression changed only slightly. When he saw the note on Atlas, his brow folded. Then the side door opened again. A woman stepped in carrying a slim county folder and a paper cup of coffee. Deputy May Whitcomb was 38, about 5'7", lean and strong in the practical way of someone who had worked outside before she ever wore a badge. Her black hair was tied low at the back of her neck, and her face had sharp lines softened only by tired brown eyes that noticed too much. She wore a dark brown winter deputy's uniform under a short insulated jacket with the county patch on the shoulder, black leather gloves tucked into her belt, and boots still wet with snow. May had once worked animal control across 3 rural counties before joining Harlan's department, which meant she had seen the good shelters, the bad ones, and the ones that used good intentions to cover bad systems. She gave Nolan a brief look, not unfriendly, not warm. "You're the one holding the shepherd," she said. "I'm the one keeping her from being taken back without answers." That's a prettier sentence. Nolan almost liked her for that. Harlan sighed. "May." "No, Sheriff. We need clean lines here." May set her folder down and looked directly at Nolan. "If you're wrong, you may be interfering with medical care for a postpartum dog and a newborn pup. If you're right, we need more than instinct in a frightened animal. We need evidence that can survive daylight." Nolan held her gaze. She was right. That annoyed him because he had spent years resenting people who use procedure to bury truth. But May did not sound like she wanted to bury anything. She sounded like she wanted it done so it could not be buried later. Nolan slid the photo of Ash's blue mark toward her. May studied it. "Who examined the pup?" "Dr. Rowe." "I trust Rowe more than most people." Harlan looked at her. "You think there's something here?" May did not answer quickly. "I think there are enough irregularities to ask questions, not enough to kick in a door." Her eyes returned to Nolan. "And you are not kicking in any doors." "I didn't say I was." "You didn't have to." For a moment, the room went quiet. Then Harlan rubbed a hand over his face. "Silver Paw saved my wife's dog." Nolan looked at him. The sheriff's voice dropped. "After our daughter died, my wife stopped sleeping, stopped eating right. There was this old hound mix, Daisy, half deaf, bad hips, ugly as a wet rug. Silver Paw placed her with us for hospice, said she might have a few months." His mouth softened painfully. "She lived 2 years. My wife got out of bed every morning because that dog needed pills at 7. May's expression changed. She had heard this before, but she did not interrupt. Harlan looked at the papers. "So when people talk about Silver Paw like it's rotten, I don't hear policy. I hear Daisy breathing beside my wife's bed." Nolan understood more than he wanted to. "That's why this has to be clean," May said quietly. "Because if something is wrong, the good they did will be the first shield they use." That was the re-hook moment that settled over all 3 of them. Not a clue, not a sudden noise, a truth. Silver Paw's kindness was not separate from the danger. It was the armor around it. Nolan felt the old shape of Reed's warning press against his memory. Good people tired enough to stop asking. Good work used to protect bad work. Mercy turned into a locked door. Harlan finally touched the papers. "I'll make calls," he said. "Quiet ones. But until I have more, I cannot seize that dog. And I won't hand her over." May leaned forward. "Then you keep her stable. You document everything. No hero work. No trespassing. No threats. No public accusations. If you make this about you, they'll bury the dog under your reputation." Nolan nodded once. "Understood." May did not seem convinced, but she accepted the answer. That afternoon, Mara Voss asked to meet Nolan. Not at Silver Paw's main building. At the small medical annex beside the sanctuary, a low structure with frosted windows and a separate entrance. Nolan knew he should refuse. He went anyway, after telling May where he would be. Mara was waiting inside the examination room. The annex was clean and warm, smelling faintly of antiseptic, rubber mats, and lavender air freshener someone had used too aggressively. Steel tables lined one wall. Cabinets of labeled medication stood locked behind glass. Mara wore her white Silver Paw coat, the blue-silver logo bright over her heart, a gray turtleneck visible beneath. Her ash-blonde hair was tied back perfectly, not one strand loose. She looked like a woman who had survived by never appearing uncertain. On the counter lay a file, not Sable's. Mara rested her hand on it. "Before you decide I am a monster, you should know what winter costs." Nolan stood near the door. "I know what winter costs." "No, you know what cold feels like. You don't know what it costs to keep 87 fragile animals alive through February when donations drop. Heating bills rise, and insulin doesn't care about good intentions. She opened the file. Inside were invoices, medication lists, heating repairs, emergency surgeries, food bills, payroll, debt notices. Nolan did not move closer, so Mara turned the pages herself. 3 winters ago, Silver Paw was 6 weeks from closing. Evelyn refused to say it publicly. June was buying canned food with her own Social Security check. I had dogs choosing between pain medication and heart medication because we could not afford both. Her voice did not shake. That made it worse. Then Caleb Strain came. Nolan watched her face at the name. Describe him. Businessman, former working dog consultant, polite, efficient. He said he had access to specialized placements for animals standard shelters could not manage. Dogs with high drive, dogs that needed structure, dogs unsuitable for ordinary homes but not hopeless. And you believed him? I wanted to. That isn't the same thing. Mara's eyes sharpened. No, it isn't. For the first time, honesty entered the room between them, thin and unwelcome. He offered funding, she said. Not enough to make us rich. Enough to keep heat in the senior ward. Enough to keep June from deciding which old dog skipped medicine. Enough to stop Evelyn from watching her promise collapse. So you traded dogs. I transferred dogs. Words matter to you. They matter to everyone pretending they don't. Mara closed the invoice file. At first, they were dogs we truly could not place. Strong, restless, too reactive for families. Then the criteria shifted. Better scent work, better nerve, better recall under stress. Dogs like Sable. Nolan's voice hardened. Pregnant dogs? Mara looked away for half a second. There it was. No, he said quietly. Look at me when you answer. Her eyes returned to his. Sable should not have been bred again, Mara said. I did not order that. But you allowed the pregnancy to become useful. The silence was answer enough. Nolan felt his anger rise, but beneath it came something more dangerous. Recognition. He had heard versions of this before in military rooms and after-action reviews. We did what we had to do. We protected the larger mission. We made the least bad choice. Mara said, I sold a few chances to save many lives. Nolan stepped closer. No, you chose which lives were easier to lose. The words left his mouth like judgment. Then they came back like a blade. Because years ago, he had chosen too. He had chosen the team's stability over Reed's fear. The official report over the uncomfortable question. The silence that protected the living from a truth the dead could no longer explain. Mara saw something shift in his face. She opened the second file. This one had no Silver Paw logo. A copied military-adjacent incident summary. Old, heavily redacted, and incomplete. Nolan's throat tightened before he saw the name. Callahan, Reed M. Mara spoke softly now. Reed Callahan asked questions about transfers. Then his file began to describe instability, obsessive behavior, unauthorized attempts to remove a working dog from approved custody. If you keep digging, Mr. Pierce, you may not restore your friend's honor. You may destroy what little the official record left him. Nolan did not touch the paper. Where did you get that? Caleb Strain keeps leverage the way some people keep receipts. The answer chilled him more than denial would have.
Mara leaned forward. Listen to me. If the state freezes our accounts tomorrow, the old dogs lose care first. Insulin stops, antibiotics stop, heat repair stops. You may save 1 mother and 1 litter and bury 20 seniors by Sunday. Nolan's jaw worked once. Mara's voice softened. I am not asking you to like me. I am asking you to understand consequence. Nolan looked at the file with Reed's name, then at Mara. You don't understand consequence, he said. You understand bargaining. He left before she could answer. That evening, Harlan and May came to the cabin. Nolan let them in after securing Sable in the laundry room with the door open enough that she could see but not feel crowded. Ash slept against her belly, stronger than he had been the night before, his tiny paws twitching. Harlan entered first, hat in hand. May followed with a camera, evidence bags, and a notepad.
She moved through the cabin with professional care, photographing the tag, Rose notes, the blue mark under Ash's ear, and the tire tracks outside before the next snow could erase them. When she approached the laundry room, Sable rose. May stopped immediately. "I'm not here to take him," she said. Her voice was calm, low, practiced by years of handling frightened animals. Sable sniffed the air. Harlan stood several feet behind May. His face had gone still. Sable looked past May to him. Then slowly, she stepped forward. Nolan tensed but did not move. Sable reached Harlan and smelled his hand. The sheriff froze. Something in his expression changed so deeply it seemed to age him in seconds. "She smells like Daisy did," he whispered. May looked at him. Harlan swallowed. "When Daisy came home from Silver Paw, she smelled like this. Not the shelter. Something else. Medicine and metal." Nolan said nothing. Harlan's eyes lowered to Sable. "Daisy's file said special placement before hospice. I never asked what that meant." Sable turned away from him and returned to Ash. But Harlan remained where he was, looking at his empty hand as if a dead dog had just placed a memory there. Later that night, after Harlan and May left with copies and photographs, the cabin cameras caught movement near the far trees. Not an attack, not a break-in, just headlights without a logo. A dark vehicle idling beyond the bend. A figure standing near the edge of the porch light's reach, too far to identify, still enough to feel intentional. Then the vehicle turned and vanished down the road. Nolan saved the footage. He did not sleep. At dawn, he opened the front door to bring in firewood and found an envelope tucked beneath a stone on the porch. No name, no return address. Inside was not a threat in the ordinary sense. No violent words, no demand, no signature. Just a printed medication inventory from Silver Paw's senior ward. Insulin, heart medication, anti-seizure tablets, antibiotics, special renal food, heating oil balance. At the bottom, in dark block handwriting, one sentence had been added. "When this stops, they stop." Nolan stood in the doorway while snow drifted across the porch. Behind him, Ash made a small, hungry sound. Sable answered immediately, curling around him with all the fierce tenderness of a mother who had already lost too much. On the table lay Reed's copied file. On the counter lay the list of old dogs who needed medicine to survive the week. Nolan looked from one to the other and felt the full cruelty of the choice finally close around him. This time, if he chose the truth, the innocent might be the first to suffer for it. The envelope stayed on Nolan Pierce's kitchen table all morning. He did not touch it again after the first time. The medication list lay beside Reed Callahan's copied file, Lena's partial records, Dr. Rowe's notes, and the printed still frame from Nolan's cabin camera showing the dark vehicle beneath the pines. On another table near the window, Sable lay with Ash pressed against her belly. The mother German shepherd was awake, as she almost always was now. Her black and gold body curved protectively around the pup, her amber eyes fixed on the door. Nolan stood at the sink with both hands braced on the counter. He wanted to go. Everything in him wanted to go. The old training, the old guilt, the memory of Reed's name on a damaged file, the knowledge that Sable's other puppies might still be inside Silver Paw's north wing. All of it pushed against his ribs like a command. Drive there, open the door, find them. But Deputy May Whitcomb's voice sat in his head like a locked gate. "If you make this about you, they'll bury the dog under your reputation." She was right. That was the part Nolan hated most. He had spent years blaming himself for not acting when Reed had asked him to look closer. Now the world had turned cruel enough to demand the opposite form of courage. Not speed, not force, patience, paperwork, witnesses, a plan that protected the innocent from the blast radius of the truth. Sable lifted her head when his phone rang. "May," Nolan answered. "Pierce." "Don't go to Silver Paw," May said without greeting. I'm still at the cabin. Good. Stay that way until we have a path that doesn't get everything tossed out. He looked at the envelope. Someone is using the old dogs as leverage. I know. Harlan showed me the photo you sent. They're not bluffing. No, May said. They're not, which means we solved 2 problems, not 1. By noon, Nolan's cabin had become something he had never intended it to be, a planning room. Sheriff Cole Harlan arrived first, hat low, face drawn, carrying a county folder and a thermos of coffee nobody drank. He looked older than he had the day before. The memory of Daisy had opened something in him, and now every paper on the table seemed to accuse him of every question he had failed to ask. May came next, compact and focused in her brown winter deputy's uniform, black hair tied low, county radio clipped near her shoulder. She brought forms, contact lists, photographs, and the kind of hard practicality that kept fear from becoming chaos. Dr. Elias Rowe arrived with his old leather bag, his olive waxed jacket dusted in snow, and his white hair pushed back from a forehead lined with concern. He checked Sable first, because for Rowe, no investigation mattered more than the living animal in front of him. Lena Ortiz came last. She parked out of sight down the road and walked the final stretch in the cold, wrapped in her charcoal coat, moss green hoodie visible beneath it. Her dark hair was tucked into a gray knit hat, and her small face looked pale from sleeplessness. She had brought a flash drive, 2 printed transfer logs, and the shaking guilt of a person who had waited too long to become brave. June Keller did not come to the cabin, but she called Harlan from Silver Paw's senior ward. Her voice came through on speaker, rough and practical. If this goes bad, I have 6 volunteers who can take seniors overnight. Maybe 8 if I guilt the church ladies hard enough. But some of these dogs can't ride far. Mr. Pritchard needs oxygen support if he panics. Rosie needs insulin exactly on schedule. Arthur bites if strangers lift him wrong, but he doesn't mean it. May wrote everything down. Nolan listened from beside the table, arms folded, jaw tight. This was the part no one would put in a heroic story. The phone calls, the medication schedules, the borrowed crates. The old dogs who had nothing to do with North Wing, but might still be harmed by its exposure. He thought of Mara's words. You may save 1 mother and 1 litter and bury 20 seniors by Sunday. She had meant them as a threat. Nolan chose to treat them as a responsibility. He called 2 men he had not spoken to in months, both veterans who live within driving distance. Not to bring weapons, not to stand guard like some fantasy of justice. He asked for heaters, spare crates, a generator, and 2 trucks with clean beds. One of the men, Tom Alvarez, answered after a long silence and said, You finally adopting a whole shelter, Pierce? Maybe just keeping one from falling apart, Nolan said. Tom did not ask for more. Text me where. By late afternoon, May had enough to request an emergency animal welfare inspection, an uncorrected medical discrepancy, evidence of a postpartum dog fleeing custody with a neonate, inconsistent transfer language, Lena's signed preliminary statement, Rowe's veterinary concern, and Harlan's report of suspected intimidation near Nolan's property. It may not open every door, May said, reviewing the papers, but it should open the right one. Lena looked toward Sable. Mara will say North Wing is quarantine. Then she can show quarantine logs, May said. She'll say stress will harm the dogs. Then Rowe evaluates stress risk on site. She'll say I'm lying because I'm afraid of losing my job. May looked up. Are you? Lena's mouth trembled. Yes. Good, May said. Truth is more useful when it admits what it costs. That was the re-hooking moment in the cabin. Not dramatic, not loud, but it changed the room. Lena, who had spent months hiding behind half-truths and corrected forms, straightened a little. Harlan stopped staring at the floor. Rowe lowered his eyes with the sad approval of a man who had waited years to hear someone inside Silver Paw speak plainly. Even Nolan felt it, the quiet force of a truth that did not pretend to be fearless. Sable rose then. No one had called her. She carried Ash by the scruff, slowly and carefully, and placed him on the folded blanket near Nolan's boot. Then she stepped away and looked toward the back door. Nolan understood the gesture in his bones. She was not offering Ash to him. She was asking him to keep him safe while she went back. Roe inhaled sharply. She's not strong enough for much. She may have to be strong enough for a little, Nolan said. May watched Sable with new respect. If she goes as part of an inspection, not as bait, not as evidence dragged around for effect. Agreed. Sable lowered her head as if accepting terms she could not possibly understand, yet somehow had already chosen. The approval came just before dusk. May received the call while standing on Nolan's porch, one gloved hand over her free ear against the wind. When she came back inside, her face was set. We have authorization for immediate inspection of restricted animal housing and neonatal care areas. Harlan leads locally. State representative meets us there. Harlan closed his folder. Then we do it now. Snow began falling again as the small convoy moved toward Silverpaw. No sirens, no spectacle. Harlan's county SUV led, followed by May's vehicle, Roe's Subaru, and Nolan's pickup. Sable rode in a crate secured in the back seat. Ash left behind at the cabin under the care of June's trusted friend, an older retired nurse named Margaret Bell, who had arrived quietly with warm towels in a calm manner. Margaret was in her early 70s, small and straight-backed, with brown skin, silver hair braided close to her head, and eyes that made panic feel unnecessary. She had cared for hospice dogs at Silverpaw for years before stepping away when her knees worsened. Sable had resisted leaving Ash until Margaret sat on the floor, hummed an old hymn under her breath, and let the pup sleep against a warm towel without reaching too fast. Nolan had watched Sable sniff the woman's hands, then Ash, then Nolan. Only then had the mother dog allowed herself to be led to the truck. At Silverpaw, the sanctuary lights glowed warmly against the darkening snow. From the front, nothing looked changed. A Christmas wreath hung on the door. The senior yard lamps cast golden circles across the snow. A volunteer carried a bag of laundry through the side entrance, unaware that the place she trusted was about to split open around her. Evelyn Hart met them in the lobby. Her cream cardigan hung loosely around her thin frame, and the blue silver scarf at her throat seemed suddenly too bright. Her silver hair was pinned as always, but wisps had escaped around her temples. She looked from Harlan to May to Nolan, then to Roe, and something in her face folded. "What is this?" she asked. Harlan removed his hat. "Emergency inspection order, Evelyn." "No." Her eyes moved toward the rear hall. "Not tonight. The dogs are settling." May handed her the paperwork. "That's why Dr. Roe is here." Mara Voss appeared before Evelyn could answer. She came from the medical corridor in her white coat, ash blonde hair tied back, posture perfect, eyes instantly calculating. For half a second, her gaze landed on Nolan, then on Sable's transport crate outside the glass doors, then on the papers in Evelyn's hand. "This is irresponsible," Mara said. May stepped forward. "It's authorized. North Wing houses medically sensitive animals. Opening it without proper preparation could harm them." "Then show us the preparation logs." Mara's face remained calm, but the muscles near her jaw tightened. "The state representative has no jurisdiction without—" A man cleared his throat from behind May. The state representative had arrived quietly in the snow. Daniel Cho was in his early 40s, average height, with straight black hair combed neatly beneath a dark wool cap, and a narrow, serious face made sterner by rectangular glasses. He wore a navy parka over a suit that looked too thin for Montana weather, and carried a sealed folder under one arm. His manner was calm, bureaucratic, and almost painfully precise. "I have jurisdiction," he said, "and a low tolerance for being misquoted before I introduce myself." May's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Mara looked at Cho, then at Harlan, then at Evelyn. Evelyn whispered, "Mara?" For the first time, Mara did not answer her immediately. That silence did more damage than denial.
They moved toward the rear corridor.
June Keller stood near the senior ward doorway with a stack of blankets clutched to her chest, her burgundy jacket dusted in dog hair. Her eyes found Nolan's. She did not look angry now, only afraid. "Don't forget them," she said. "I won't," Nolan answered. At the locked rear door, Mara entered a code. The keypad beeped. The metal door opened with a soft release of air. North Wing smelled different from the rest of Silverpaw. Not filthy, not neglected. That would have been simpler. It smelled of sterilized floors, metal, filtered air, and animals kept too quiet for too long. The hallway beyond was white, narrow, and painfully clean. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Metal kennel doors lined both sides, each marked with laminated codes instead of names. No colorful blankets, no family photos, no toys chewed into strange shapes by happy mouths. Just numbers, clipboards, stainless bowls, cameras in black domes. A soft, electronic tone sounded from somewhere deeper in the hall. 3 notes. The dogs inside the kennels went still. Not one bark, not one paw against metal. The silence was so complete that Nolan heard Evelyn begin to cry behind him. Roe looked at the kennels, his old face going hard. "That isn't rehabilitation," he said. Mara's voice cut in. "It prevents escalation." May turned to her. "By teaching every dog in the hall to disappear inside its own body?" Mara did not respond. They brought Sable in only after Roe checked her and confirmed she could walk a short distance. Nolan held the loose lead, not tight, not pulling. Sable emerged from the crate trembling, her body low, ears back. But she did not collapse. Her nose lifted. She smelled the air once. Then everything in her changed. She stopped being a frightened runaway. She became a mother with a map inside her bones. Sable moved past the first line of kennels, past dogs that watched from the corners without sound, past a utility door, past a treatment room with shelves of labeled supplies. She did not hesitate at intersections. Nolan followed, giving her space, while May filmed and Roe watched every step. At the end of the hall, Sable turned left toward a small room glowing with amber heat lamps. Mara said sharply, "That room is restricted." Cho looked at her. "That appears to be the point." May opened the door after photographing the latch. Inside were 3 puppies in a heated enclosure. German shepherds, tiny, black along the back, pale gold at the throats and paws. Each had a small blue mark near one ear. Sable made a sound Nolan would remember for the rest of his life. Not a bark, not a whine. A broken breath pulled from the deepest part of her. She surged forward, but Nolan held the lead with both hands and lowered himself beside her. "Wait," he whispered. "Let Roe check them. Just a minute, girl. Just a minute." Sable trembled violently, but she waited. That was love too. Not the wild kind. The disciplined kind that trusted someone else for the sake of the ones she loved. Roe examined the puppies quickly. His old hands were gentle, his voice low. One female was weak. One male fussed angrily. The third was asleep until Sable's nose touched the edge of the enclosure. Then it began rooting toward her scent. Roe looked up. "They're alive." Nolan closed his eyes for half a second. Behind him, Lena Ortiz began to sob silently. Sable pressed her muzzle through the opening and licked each pup in turn, fast, desperate, counting them with her tongue. Nolan's throat tightened. She had not lost all of them, not yet. But North Wing was not done giving up its secrets. From the far end of the corridor came a slow metallic scrape. Nolan turned. A large German shepherd stood inside the last kennel. Atlas. In person, he looked older than the copy had shown. Yellow and black coat dulled by age, silver around the muzzle, broad chest still proud beneath the years. One shoulder carried an old, healed scar, pale beneath the fur. His eyes were deep brown and steady, not pleading, not frantic. He watched Nolan with the exhausted patience of a soldier who had kept position long after the battle was over. He did not bark. He lifted his right paw, pressed it once to the bars, lowered it, pressed again. Nolan walked toward him slowly. On the kennel door there was no name, only a code. RC-04A/closed. Working dog rehab. May photographed it. Then she opened the plastic file sleeve mounted beside the latch. Most of the papers were current feeding logs and behavior notes, but tucked behind them, folded wrong and nearly hidden, was an older page with a water stain across the top. May read aloud. Handler raised concern regarding unauthorized transfers. Review pending. Nolan reached for the page. At the bottom, beneath a line of fading print, was a small handwritten mark. Not Reed's full name. Not an explanation. A call sign. The one Reed had used only with men he trusted. Nolan's hand stopped before touching it. The hallway faded around him. For years he had lived with a version of Reed made by official language. Unstable, obsessive, reckless, dead before the paperwork settled. Now, in a silent kennel at the back of a sanctuary, a dog stood beside a scrap of paper that said Reed had not been imagining shadows. Atlas lowered his head. With slow effort, he gripped the edge of a worn blanket in his teeth and pulled it aside. Beneath it lay a small waterproof pouch, old, flattened, and carefully hidden against the back corner. May stepped in first, photographing before touching. Then she opened it with gloved hands. Inside was a memory card sealed in plastic. No dramatic message, no accusation written in blood, just a small thing kept safe by a dog who had remembered where his handler's truth was buried. May placed the card in an evidence sleeve. Nolan looked at Atlas, then back towards Sable, who stood over her recovered puppies while Roe prepared a transport box. 2 dogs, 2 memories, one mother who remembered the way back, one old working dog who had waited for someone to open the door correctly. Nolan did not open the card. Not there, not in front of Mara, not before it could be handled properly. He only rested his fingers against the outside of Atlas's kennel, not reaching in, not demanding trust. Atlas leaned forward and touched his nose once to the bars. Behind Nolan, Mara said nothing. For once, there was nothing clean enough for her to say. And as May sealed the evidence, Nolan understood the truth had not come roaring out of North Wing. It had waited quietly in a dog's kennel, hidden beneath a blanket, until someone finally opened the door in a way no one could close again. The memory card was not opened at Silverpaw. May Whitcomb would not allow it. She sealed it in an evidence sleeve, signed the label, had Daniel Cho witness it, and placed it inside a locked case in Sheriff Harlan's vehicle. Nolan Pierce watched the process without argument. Years ago, he might have demanded to hear it immediately. Years ago, he might have mistaken urgency for righteousness. Not this time. This time, the truth had waited long enough to deserve protection. North Wing was secured before midnight. The dogs were documented, photographed, examined, and moved only when Dr. Rowe said moving them would not cause more harm than leaving them. Sable's 3 remaining puppies were placed in a warmed transport carrier beside their mother. She never took her eyes off them. Every time one squeaked, her ears moved first, then her whole body, as if each sound pulled a thread from her heart. Atlas was the last to leave his kennel. The old German shepherd stood silently while Rowe examined him. He was larger than he had seen behind the bars, though age had thinned him along the hips. His coat was yellow and black, dulled by years indoors, with silver fur around his muzzle and brow. His right shoulder carried an old, healed scar beneath the coat, not ugly, just permanent. His eyes were deep brown, steady and tired, the eyes of a dog who had learned that barking did not always bring help. When Nolan approached, Atlas did not lean away. He only looked at him. Nolan, still in his green camouflage field clothes, clean-shaven face drawn with exhaustion, crouched slowly in front of the old dog. His broad shoulders seemed heavier than they had that morning. The disciplined posture remained, but grief had moved closer to the surface. "You kept it," Nolan whispered. Atlas blinked once. No one else would have called that an answer. Nolan did. The card was read the next morning in Sheriff Harlan's office. No music, no dramatic screen, no crowd. Just Harlan, May, Daniel Cho, Dr. Rowe, Lena Ortiz, and Nolan sitting around a conference table that smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and wet wool coats. Outside the window, Marrow Creek moved through another winter morning, unaware that one of its most trusted places had begun to come apart. May connected the card to an evidence laptop. The first file was audio. Static opened the room. Then Reed Callahan's voice came through. Tired, hoarse, alive in a way that made Nolan forget how to breathe. Nolan, if this ever gets to you, then I was either right or too stubborn to let it die clean. Nolan closed his eyes. Reed had been 38 when he died. In memory, he had a lean, restless frame, close-cropped dark hair, a sharp nose that had been broken once in training, and a crooked half-smile that appeared whenever danger made other men too serious. He had never been careless. That was what haunted Nolan most. Reed had been intense, yes. Troubled by what he had seen, yes. But not unstable in the way the reports had tried to make him. The recording continued. Reed spoke about transfer language, dogs marked unsuitable for public adoption, being moved through rehabilitation contracts, working dogs sent to private partners under vague behavioral categories, files altered slowly, never dramatically enough to shock anyone at first glance. Then Atlas. Atlas isn't dangerous because he's broken, Reed said. He reacts because he remembers a transport route they claim doesn't exist. They call that instability. I call it evidence with teeth. May looked up from her notes. No one spoke. Reed's voice crackled again. They don't need everyone to be evil, Nolan. They just need good people to be tired. The sentence landed in Nolan like something both new and old. Evelyn tired. Harlan grateful. Lena afraid. Roe pushed out. June overwhelmed. And Nolan, years ago, too tired of loss to believe his friend had seen something real. That was the rehook of the chapter, though there would be no next mystery to chase after it. It was the kind of line that did not reveal a new villain. It revealed how villains survived. They survived inside everyone's exhaustion. The last recording was shorter. Reed's breathing was rough. Somewhere behind him, a dog shifted against metal. Don't burn down what still shelters the innocent, Reed said. But don't let them hide cruelty behind kindness. If Atlas still trusts you, follow him. He remembers what people pay to forget. The file ended. Nolan sat very still. For a moment, no one moved in the office. Even May, who usually filled silence with procedure, let it stand. Harlan finally removed his glasses and rubbed both eyes. I should have asked more questions, he said. Nolan looked at him. So should I. That was all the forgiveness either man could offer that morning. By noon, the state investigation expanded. North Wing was placed under official control. Records were copied. Transfer logs were seized. The dogs were evaluated one by one, not as assets, not as codes, but as living animals with names to be restored. Caleb Strain was taken into custody 2 days later outside a private training facility near Billings. He was not dragged out like a movie villain. He walked beside investigators in a black technical coat, dark tactical pants, and polished boots that had never touched kennel muck. Caleb was 45, tall and lean, with neatly combed dark brown hair, pale eyes, and a face too controlled to reveal anger. He looked less like a criminal than a consultant leaving an inconvenient meeting. That was his danger. He had always known how to make cruelty sound like efficiency. Mara Voss was suspended pending investigation. When Nolan saw her again, she was standing outside the senior ward at Silverpaw, no longer wearing the white coat. Without it, she looked smaller. Just a woman around 50 in a gray turtleneck, ash blonde hair tied back too tightly, hands bare in the cold as if she had forgotten gloves. Behind the glass, old dogs slept under blankets. Mara did not ask for sympathy. She did not claim innocence. She looked at Sable, who stood beside Nolan with her recovered puppies tucked safely in a warmed crate behind Roe. I told myself they wouldn't remember, Mara said. Nolan followed her gaze to Sable. The mother dog's amber eyes were fixed on Mara. She did not growl. She did not lunge. She only stood there, black and gold body, thin but upright, every inch of her saying that survival was not forgetfulness. She did, Nolan said. Mara looked away first. Evelyn Hart faced the town 3 days later in the community hall. She wore her cream cardigan and blue-silver scarf, but the scarf no longer looked like a symbol. It looked like something she had not yet earned the right to remove. Her silver hair was pinned low, though loose strands framed her pale, exhausted face. People came angry. People came heartbroken. Some came ready to defend Silverpaw because their dogs had been saved there. Others came carrying adoption photos and trembling questions. Evelyn stood at the front and did not sit down. I knew there was a special transfer program, she said. I told myself it was complicated. I told myself Mara understood the medical side better than I did. I told myself the money kept our senior dogs alive. Her voice shook. Then she said the sentence that changed the room. I thought not knowing kept me innocent. June Keller stood from the front row. The older volunteer still wore her burgundy puffer jacket, dog hair clinging to one sleeve, her silver curls flattened by a knit cap. Her hands were red and rough, and her eyes were wet but hard. Then start knowing, June said. Every name, every cage, every dog. No one clapped. It was better that way. Silverpaw did not close entirely. It would have been easier to tell the story that way. Easier, but less true. North Wing was sealed, then emptied, then dismantled under supervision. The senior ward remained open under an emergency board. Dr. Rowe agreed to oversee medical care temporarily. Lena Ortiz, pale but steadier now, became records manager under May's inspection protocol. Every transfer required a real destination, a real follow-up, and a name attached to responsibility. Harlan stood before the town and admitted he had trusted reputation more than evidence. May filed the procedures. June kept the old dogs fed. Justice did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like cleaning a wound, slowly, painfully, without pretending the pain meant failure. Sable came home to Nolan's cabin with Ash and the 3 other puppies. They were small, loud, hungry, and astonishingly alive. Ash remained the boldest, though his eyes were barely open before he started crawling toward Nolan's boots, as if trouble were hereditary. Atlas came too. Not as a replacement for Bishop. Nolan would never do that to either dog. Atlas chose the space near the front door, where he could see the room, the windows, and the porch. The first night he slept sitting up. The second he lay down but kept his head raised. By the fourth he slept with his chin on his paws, while the puppies stumbled over his tail. He endured them with the solemn patience of an old soldier assigned to nursery duty. Nolan's cabin changed in ways so small a stranger might have missed them. Extra bowls near the sink, clean towels stacked by the fire, a low pen made from old boards, puppy milk warming in a pan, June arriving with food and pretending she was not checking on Nolan too, May stopping by with paperwork, and when she thought no one watched, letting Ash chew the edge of her glove. Harlan leaving a bundle of split wood on the porch without knocking. Margaret Bell humming in the laundry room while weighing the smallest female pup. Lena mailing copies of corrected records with handwritten notes in the margins. Life entered the cabin cautiously, like an animal not sure it was welcome. Nolan let it in. One evening after the first week, he stood before the mantel. For 2 years, Bishop's photograph had been turned face down. Not because Nolan wanted to forget him, because remembering had felt like standing in a doorway he could not cross. He picked up the frame and turned it upright. Bishop looked back at him, young and broad-headed, ears high, eyes bright with the stubborn loyalty that had once saved Nolan from disappearing completely. Beside the photograph, Nolan placed Bishop's old collar. Then a small photograph of Reed Callahan from years ago, smiling crookedly beside a working dog training field. Then the sealed copy of the memory card, preserved in a small glass case, not as a trophy, but as a warning. Quiet cries mattered. Small doubts mattered. The things no one wanted to hear often became the things that saved the next life. That night, snow fell gently. Sable lay before the fire with her puppies pressed around her belly. Her black and gold coat had begun to shine again. She was still thin, still watchful, still haunted by sudden sounds, but she no longer woke every few minutes to count only loss. Now when she counted, all 4 pups answered in warm, squirming little movements. Atlas rested near the open line between hallway and main room, eyes half closed, one ear twitching whenever the wind touched the porch. Nolan sat on the floor with his back against the leather chair. He placed one hand on the boards near Sable, not on her, not demanding anything. After a while, Sable opened her eyes. She looked at him. Then she lowered her chin onto his hand. Nolan did not move. His eyes burned, but he did not turn away from the feeling. It was not forgiveness in the way humans name things. It was trust offered by a creature who had every reason to keep it. That was enough. The next morning, the sky over Montana cleared pale and blue. Nolan opened the front door and let the cold air enter without flinching. The road beyond the trees lay white and quiet. Somewhere out there was the place where Sable had first run from the white ambulance, carrying one life because it was all she could save. Sable stepped onto the porch beside him. She looked down the road for a long time. This time, she did not run. Behind them, Atlas lay just inside the doorway, no bars between him and the world. The puppies tumbled over a folded blanket near the fire. Ash, unsteady and determined, waddled onto the porch and tripped over Nolan's boot. Nolan bent and caught him gently. "Easy, little man," he whispered. "Nobody's taking you back." Ash wriggled in his hands, alive and offended by gravity. For the first time in longer than Nolan could remember, he laughed. Not loudly, not for anyone else, just enough to warm the cold air between him and the dog beside him. Sable leaned against his leg. The cabin behind them glowed with firelight. There were still hearings ahead, records to correct, dogs to place, apologies that would not fix everything, grief that would not vanish just because truth had finally been spoken. But the door was open. No one inside was running, and in that small Montana cabin, Nolan Pierce finally understood that redemption was not always about saving the life he had failed to save. Sometimes it was about hearing the next quiet cry before the snow covered it forever. Sometimes the hardest truth is not the one we discover, but the one we choose not to ignore. Nolan could have walked away. The town could have protected its comfortable story. But Sable reminded them that silence does not heal what has been hidden. In our own lives, we may not face a locked sanctuary door, but we all face moments when doing what is right costs more than staying quiet. May we have the courage to listen when something feels wrong, the patience to protect the innocent, and the grace to make things right without losing our hearts. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories of loyalty, truth, and second chances still matter, consider subscribing and joining us for the next one.